IMU is a monster with powers unlike that we've ever seen in One Piece, but we now actually have some truly insane, shocking new hints at their true powers that reveal that they might be an ancient dark god or even the original devil in the story itself that created the devil fruits. But that's not all we got, because for the first time ever, one of the Gorosei is dead and replaced. Like, what? No one expected that at all, and it literally changes everything for the future of the story. And we will get into all that and the meaning of Garling's new role in just a few minutes, but first let's bring this back to the world's #1 most mysterious character ever, IMU. Because in chapter 1125, this shady ruler straight up murdered Saint Saturn here. And let me tell you, it happened in the most terrifying way imaginable, with Saturn's body literally drying up like a mummy and with his skin literally being burned to ash and drying out by these evil looking black flames here. Which, I mean, just wow. Like, what a horrifying scene to witness. But if we actually break this down here, there are actually some really important clues in here that reveal a ton about what IMU's real powers could be. So, let's first analyze what we know so far. First, we have suspected that IMU and the Gorosei are actually super old, possibly as old as the Void Century, and this chapter surprisingly just confirmed that Saturn is at the very least over 200 years old with this short flashback right here. Which is just a crazy thing to do, just randomly and casually dropping that in a chapter. I mean, Oda out here casually dropping major lore just like Gege brings back dead characters randomly in JJK. Ouch, too soon? Okay, let's move back to One Piece here. With this new information, we can reasonably assume that IMU and the other Gorosei have been alive ever since the end of the Void Century, at least 800 years ago. So I guess we can check off on our list here that IMU is actually immortal, or at least has eternal youth. And then the next major bit of info we get about them was the major reveal back in chapter 1085, where we first saw IMU and the other Gorosei transform into their massive beast-like forms. And while IMU's transformation is the only one that has yet to be fully revealed, we now know that the Gorosei were indeed giant monster demons with mythical powers. So at the very least, we can assume that IMU will have a very similar transformation, just with way more power than any of their 5 subordinates, right? But probably the most shocking reveal of their powers came in this very chapter, where IMU finally showed their most terrifying ability yet. Because out of nowhere, IMU straight up melted the former warrior god of science with these black flames that literally seemed to suck the life out of Saturn from all the way across the ocean in Marijua. So just wow. Clearly this is an absolutely mind-blowing display of power, but it also reveals that IMU seems to have absolute control over all the Gorosei. And after watching Saturn literally wither to dust as if his lifespan were literally sucked from his body, I have to, well, I just said literally a lot, that's for one, but I also have to say that I think it is pretty clear that IMU is the one who gave the other Gorosei their eternal youth to begin with. Because I mean, if he can take it away so easily, then it makes sense that he was the one who gave them the power of long life in the first place, and then IMU just basically getting those powers back that he gave them initially anyways. But this still leaves us with the most important question here. What is IMU's power? Is it a devil fruit, or is it actually some other type of divine ability we just don't know about yet in the story? Well, let's start by imagining at least that it is a devil fruit. Then it would clearly be the most busted, broken devil fruit power we have ever seen. I mean, they seem to be able to summon the Gorosei across incredible distances all around the globe, take and give out immortality, and send out these horrible black flames. And that's not even considering his own beast transformation that we have yet to fully see. And all of that adds up to a devil fruit power unlike anything we have ever seen before. I mean, it would have to be a god tier devil fruit at least. And some ideas we've had in the past are things like a dark moon god fruit or a sea god devil fruit. And that last one made sense with IMU's naming scheme, since IMU is in reverse Umi, which is the Japanese word for the ocean. But yet another option to consider is that maybe IMU ate the original devil fruit, the OG fruit, like the very first one that came before all the others, which could explain why their powers are just so absurdly broken compared to everyone else. But then there's also some really strong evidence that Imu's powers are just not related to devil fruits at all. And honestly, I'm kind of starting to believe in this idea a lot more each time that we see them do anything. And I mean, the main piece of evidence to support this idea is this panel right here, because here we see the transformed Mercury leaping out over the water with what seems like absolutely no chance of avoiding the water, which is something that basically no devil fruit user would ever do. And to me, this single fact strongly points to the idea that the Gorosei and Imu's powers are not devil fruit abilities at all, but something far, far darker and more powerful. Okay, just for example, let me flip this around for a moment and talk about the mythical sun god Nika fruit. Now, we don't know a whole lot about this legendary figure yet, but their powers have been passed down at very least twice to both the original Joy Boy and now to Luffy. But honestly, there is nothing saying that the original Nika powers came straight from a devil fruit at all. It could just have been that Nika's abilities were some actual godlike natural abilities of a real god. And so to bring this idea back to Imu, who's to say that their powers can't be similarly godlike without being tied to a devil fruit, but just being a straight up god? Which opens up the possibilities that maybe Imu is just an actual devil or the devil himself, or that he could have awakened a true dark power we don't know about yet back during the Void Century. And we'll actually dive a little bit deeper into this dark history a little bit later on in this video, but now that we've discussed Imu's potential abilities, it's now time to figure out exactly who this mysterious figure might be. Who is he? Or who is she? Well, it's actually pretty simple. Turns out Imu is obviously Nobara from JJK, and that's because she can die just like Imu. Okay, I'll stop. I promise that's my last comment here. Now, the possibility for Imu's true identity are honestly pretty limited, but there are some truly fascinating theories out there that might actually shock you if you haven't heard them yet. First though, let's get the easy options out of the way. It is technically possible that we've actually seen Imu before in the story and just never realized it, like maybe as some sort of background character or character we thought was irrelevant or something. And I only mention this as an option because it would be very Oda-like to just randomly show Imu in the past somewhere where we met them as like this nice person who wasn't really important. But honestly, I kind of can't think of a single character who would make too much sense here, so let's move on to Imu's true identity instead being Nefertari di Lily. And this might come as a little bit of a shock, but there is some pretty striking evidence for this, so let's just lay it all out here. And first, let's put on our Egyptian lore hats here, because turns out that the name Imu, or more specifically Im, has actually many ties to Egyptian mythology. For starters, there is an actual Egyptian god who shares a name with Im, and this god is actually one of the original gods of creation in ancient Egypt. But to take it one step further, their name means the hidden one in hieroglyphics, which completely fits perfectly with Imu's position as the hidden ruler of the world. Now, you might be asking, how does this connect to Lily exactly? Well, we do know that Lily was the ruler of Alabasta, which is the kingdom based on ancient Egypt in One Piece. But that's not all, because remember the empty throne and all the swords that the 20 kings placed in front of it to symbolize peace? Peace? Well, there are actually only 19 swords in this panel when you count it, and the missing one must of course be Lily's, who refused to join the other rulers in Marijua. At least that's what we're supposed to think, but we might actually already know where Lily's sword actually is. Because in fact, we can most likely see it right here in Imu's garden, which just is yet another piece of evidence that Imu might indeed have been Lily. However, with that being said, there are actually some pretty strong counter arguments to this theory as well, such as Imu saying that Lily made a grave mistake, which is a little bit weird if they're talking about themselves in the third person looking at their own picture. So this theory still has a pretty high chance of being wrong after all, as fun as it is, which just leaves the idea that Imu is just their own person and not secretly anyone else that we've already heard about, meaning that they likely came all the way from at least the Void Century. And you might have actually forgotten by now, but we do actually know that Imu's family name is probably Nerona, which was one of the original 20 families who created the world government. So it's very possible that they were just a regular dude or girl, I guess, who were part of one of the great families back in that time. But that still leaves the massive question of what role did they actually play in the Void Century? Like, were Were they the mastermind behind the 20 kingdoms defeating the ancient kingdom? Did they betray Joy Boy, or perhaps did they actually come from even deeper in the distant past than just the Void Century? These are just some of the greatest remaining questions about Imu, so let's start with what we actually know for sure. For one, clearly Imu has some sort of PTSD related to Joy Boy because of something that happened in the past. One, they immediately recognized Joy Boy's haki all the way around the world and had the most intense reaction that we've never seen from them before. Them being so triggered, they just ended up straight up murdering Saturn. So there is definitely some real connection and history here, and I've been speculating about it in the past that Imu was actually potentially a companion or something like a real or fake brother to Joy Boy like Ace and Luffy because of clues left in the pirate song Bing Sake. That was from that video right here. So this reaction to Joy Boy could be because Imu was once Joy Boy's friend, but later then betrayed the legendary pirate, or they just had some sort of conflicting philosophy and ended up fighting. After all, Vegapunk said that he couldn't really tell which of the two sides fighting during the Void Century was right or wrong. But this reaction that Imu had to Joy Boy's haki could have been some really intense guilt that they felt right here. Or on the other hand, Joy Boy could have given Imu a really massive beatdown or permanent scar or wound in the past, and now the secret ruler is afraid of that happening ever again. But even with a connection to Joy Boy, that still doesn't explain how Imu came to rule the group that then became the world government, right? And so just to speculate for a little bit here, if I had to guess, I would imagine that Imu was just a regular person from the Void Century who gained some sort of special power. It could even have been from while traveling with Joy Boy potentially, because just like it seems that their group found the ancient weapons, maybe Imu themselves found some other mysterious power as well. Perhaps it was the OG Devil Fruit, kind of like the worm thing in Attack on Titan, like we discussed earlier, or maybe an even darker power that I will discuss in just a moment. But whatever it was, I'd imagine that it was this power which was the reason why Imu could have betrayed Joy Boy to begin with. Perhaps they all discovered this power together, but Joy Boy refused to use it, so Imu stole it for himself instead. And I think that that narrative really fits nicely with Joy Boy having to use the destructive ancient weapons in the end to stop Imu before then ultimately deciding it wasn't worth the cost. However, of course, this is all just speculation so far based on the few clues that we know. So before we move on to the insanity that is Friggle and Garling in this chapter, let's first jump even further back into history, because we already mentioned that maybe Imu is an immortal god-like figure similar to Nika, but I didn't lay out all the evidence for this theory quite yet. Because in case you actually didn't know, in Japanese, there are actually real differences in the word ancient when describing the ancient weapons and the ancient kingdom. Because in reality, the ancient kingdom in Japanese Daiokoku is much more accurately translated as the Great Kingdom, while the ancient weapons, the Kyodai Heiki, do actually literally mean that they are ancient. And this has led to me speculating that the ancient weapons have been around for far longer than just the ancient kingdom and the Void Century. And since Imu possesses an ancient weapon, it would make a lot of sense that they have actually owned it since way back in time. Basically, I'm talking about the idea here that One Piece has 3 different eras, or 4, I guess. One is the current one with Luffy, then we have the time in between with Nolan and Roger and all these people, but then we have Joy Boy's era, Luffy, Joy Boy, and then there was an era before that, which might have been the era of the real sun god Nika. And so just for a moment, let's run with this idea that Imu is actually an ancient god-like creature going back to Nika's time. What would that tell us? Well, first, it is entirely possible that Imu was once similar to Nika or even of the same race, but then turned dark for whatever reason, maybe when they came down from the moon as we see in Enel's cover story. We could even look at the Christian Bible here as a big reference, because this story would be very similar to God casting out the dark angel Satan from heaven, which means that Imu could have been causing chaos in the world all this time. Or the idea that I like even more is that this dark god Imu was sealed away for ages, maybe by Nika after Nika defeated them, then released again by accident maybe during the Void Century, defeating Joy Boy, which then led to his evil influence entering the world once again until Luffy, the new sun gods, can now defeat them once again. That would be a really nice cyclical narrative that I personally would really enjoy, going from Nika succeeding to Joy Boy failing to Luffy succeeding again, or Luffy just breaking that cycle. But that's now enough about the unknown past. Let's now talk about this absolute villain right here. I mean, look, I know he's an evil dude who has done many terrible things, but that doesn't mean we can't appreciate the massive balls that it just takes to walk in on the Gorosei and tell them what's up. And as he just casually sits down and proclaims himself the new warrior god of science, the other Gorosei are absolutely shocked. In fact, this reaction here leads me to believe that this has never happened before in history. So for the very first time ever of the world government, one of the Gorosei here has been killed and replaced. Which I guess doesn't necessarily have to be true, but since we know that they're technically immortal and all of them had the nice planet scheme going on in their names, which now has been broken, this does make a lot of sense to me. And I hope this time around I can safely assume that no one in the community predicted Saturn just getting murked just like he did in this chapter, because it was pretty much in everyone's mind that the 5 Gorosei we started with would be the ones that the Straw Hats eventually would have to overcome in the final battle. But I guess nope, just throw that idea out the window now, because everything has changed, because who's to say now that the others can't also just be replaced? And who knows, maybe we'll just have a brand new set of Gorosei before the final battle. And if you know anything about anime power scaling logic, then of course these new Gorosei will absolutely have to be stronger than the old ones. Which is actually gonna be a real problem for Luffy, because he could barely just handle Saint Saturn, who appeared to be kind of the weakest of the Gorosei on Egghead Island already. However, before talking more about Garling's future role in the story, we first have to clarify why IMU took such a dramatic step in killing Saturn to begin with. Because remember that Saturn thought that they had accomplished most of their objectives on Egghead Island except for Vegapunk's message, but clearly IMU does not care about any of that. The only thing that they focused on was that they let Joy Boy escape once again. So as punishment, Saturn got the life literally sucked out of him, and clearly IMU is way more worried about the return of Joy Boy. Which kind of makes you wonder if the Gorosei just straight up hid that fact from him that someone had eaten the Nika fruit again. Who knows? I hope we get some answers to that. But what does that mean for Garling here? Will he inherit Saturn's demonic beast powers, or will he get his very own new powers? Because one thing that we don't know for sure yet is how IMU has such total control over the Gorosei. Remember, IMU can speak in their heads and take their life away from half around the planet, so that sure seems like absolute control if you ask me. So the question is, will IMU have the very same control over Garling? And I guess we would kind of have to imagine that they would, but clearly Garling is not immortal yet like the other Gorosei. After all, we've seen him age from a young man on God Valley to his current old age. And so all of that makes me think that Garling might actually have to go through some sort of dark ritual to receive power from IMU, which would also place Garling under the evil ruler's control. Or maybe he has to eat a piece of some dark, twisted devil fruit to transfer the powers. I mean, either way, I can't imagine that IMU would name Garling as a new member of the Gorosei without having complete control over the Elder Figureland as well. Honestly, I can't wait to see what will happen with Garling, so please Oda, give me a Shanks versus Garling showdown. I'm begging you. The power levels would just be off the charts. However, of course, that's not the only insane power that was hinted at in this chapter, because we also saw Punk Records float off into the sky with the help of the Island Cloud machine as well. And I gotta be honest, this part of the chapter was kind of a weird mix of disappointment and excitement for me, because I was honestly feeling a little bit disappointed that after the emotional scenes with Lilith and the last chapter and all of the sacrifices of the other Vegapunks throughout this arc, we now find out that all of them are somehow still alive and have reformed into a new body, which kind of killed the hype around Lilith being the last Vegapunk here. But I guess it shouldn't be surprising then about Oda bringing back characters that were supposed to be dead, so I guess silly me. But then on the other hand, with Punk Records now floating around and the other Vegapunk satellites being back in action, we now have the insane potential of a technological breakthrough relating to Joy Boy. Because if you paid attention to who the Vegapunks called at the end of this chapter, then you'll notice that this guy is the same guy that showed Nami the weather knot technology back during the time skip. Which is actually super important, because as we just saw with Emeth, you can store some pretty damn powerful stuff inside of knots, apparently. And so if the Vegapunks and the Witheria scientists can find a way to learn the hockey weaving knot technology that Joy Boy gave to Emeth, we might actually have a new super powerful technology to use in the fight against the world government. But that's not the only problem they could solve, because they could also work on a solution for Dragon's big fears at the end of this chapter, because as Dragon says here, the fear of a flood will spread across the entire world now, and people will naturally start to fight over higher land and resources. So I think it will actually be an insanely clutch and important development if the Vegapunks and Witheria scientists can figure out a way to create new island clouds to rescue people from a massive flood. Now, of course, Emu might just be able to wipe all of them out with his flying ancient weapon anyways, but they have at least to try something to save the world, right? And honestly though, there is still one big question from all of this that I'm just dying to know the answer to. What actually happened between Joy Boy and Emu? I mean, it's pretty clear at this point that they knew each other, had some sort of relationship, or at the very least fought each other, but somehow Joy Boy could not actually defeat Emu, or maybe the real answer is that he did not want to defeat Emu, which would make perfect sense if the secret I have discovered hidden in the Bing Saga lyrics below here is true. And if you want to know the true relationship between Joy Boy and Emu and his entire life story hidden in that song, check that video out right here. Otherwise, as always, thanks so much for watching, and thanks so much to all of our Patreons. If you want to support the channel and get access to some really cool perks, go check that out as well, and I will see you in the next one.